Have you ever felt like something was missing, even when you had everything you once dreamed of? Orion sits in his high-rise apartment, looking over the city lights. He has it all: money, success, recognition. But deep inside, there's a void he can't seem to fill. Why do I still feel empty? He remembers the younger days, when happiness was as simple as laughing with friends, feeling the wind on his face, or watching a sunset without worrying about the next day. But now, despite having everything society defines as success, he feels disconnected. Then, ding, a message lights up his phone screen, an unexpected text from his old teacher. "Orion, it's been a long time. I think you need this conversation. Let's meet?" He hesitates. Part of him wants to ignore it, but something deep down tells him this meeting might change everything. Finally, he grabs his keys and steps out the door. He doesn't know exactly what he's searching for, but maybe, just maybe, the answer to happiness isn't in what he owns, it's in something much deeper. So, where does true happiness come from? Let's find out. 1. The Lost Man. Orion steps into the dimly lit cafe, the scent of roasted coffee beans filling the air. It's been years since he was last here. Back then, this place was full of ideas, debates, and late-night conversations. Now it feels distant, like something from a life he barely recognizes. At a corner table, he spots Mr. Ellis, his old teacher. The man hasn't changed much, still calm, still watching the world with those same thoughtful eyes. Orion hesitates before sitting down. The waitress places 2 cups of black coffee in front of them, just like old times. Mr. Ellis stirs his cup slowly and looks up. "Orion," he says with a nod, "it's been a while. What brings you back?" Orion exhales, his fingers tightening around the warm ceramic mug. "I don't know," he admits. "I should be happy, but I'm not." The words feel heavy, almost foreign, coming out of his mouth. For years, he did everything he was supposed to. He climbed the corporate ladder, built a reputation, earned wealth beyond what he ever imagined. And yet, every morning, he wakes up feeling empty. The harder he worked, the more he achieved, the less satisfied he became. "I have everything," he continues, shaking his head, "but it feels meaningless." Mr. Ellis leans back, nodding as if he has heard this before. "Let me ask you something," he says. "What did you believe would make you happy?" Orion thinks about it. A high-paying job. A big house. The respect of others. He got all of it. Yet nothing lasted. The joy of landing his dream job faded once the long hours and stress took over. The house, impressive as it was, became just another space he moved through, empty and silent. Even recognition, which he once craved, felt hollow. People admired his accomplishments, not who he was. Every time he reached a goal, happiness slipped through his fingers. "You're not alone," Mr. Ellis says, watching Orion closely. "Most people fall into what's called the hedonic treadmill." Orion frowns. "The what?" Mr. Ellis takes a slow sip of coffee. "It's the cycle of always wanting more. You think, I'll be happy when I get this, but once you get it, the feeling fades. So you set another goal, thinking that will be the thing that finally makes you happy. And then another, and another. Until one day, you look back and realize you've been running your whole life, but you're still in the same place." Orion feels a lump in his throat. That's exactly what happened. He spent decades chasing what society told him was success, believing that somewhere along the way he'd find happiness. But here he is, at the top, looking down, wondering why he still feels so lost. Mr. Ellis studies him for a moment before asking, "Orion, tell me, what's the difference between pleasure and happiness?" Orion hesitates. "Aren't they the same?" Mr. Ellis shakes his head. "Not even close." He sets his cup down. Pleasure is external. It's the thrill of buying something new, the high of winning, the satisfaction of being admired. It comes from things, from circumstances. But happiness, it's different. It's internal. It doesn't depend on what's happening around you. It's something you carry with you. Orion sits with that thought. He's been living off pleasure, money, status, validation. But real happiness? When was the last time he truly felt it? The more he thinks, the clearer it becomes. It wasn't when he got a raise or bought his dream car. It was in the small, quiet moments. Walking through the rain, not caring if he got wet, laughing until his stomach hurt. Sitting on the beach and just watching the waves. Moments of presence, not achievement. Moments where he wasn't chasing anything. He looks up. "So what you're saying is, I've been looking in the wrong place all along? Mr. Ellis smiles. That's exactly what I'm saying. He leans forward, his voice quieter but full of certainty. Happiness, Orion, isn't something you find, it's something you create. Orion exhales, rubbing his temple. Then why does it feel so unreachable? Mr. Ellis tilts his head slightly. Because you've spent your whole life looking outward. The Stoics believe that happiness isn't about what you own, but how you think. If you want to be truly happy, you need to master your own mind. Orion stares down at his coffee, watching the steam rise. He doesn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, he feels like he's asking the right questions. And maybe, just maybe, that's where happiness begins. 2 false expectations about happiness. Orion swirls his coffee, watching the steam rise in slow, delicate circles. Outside the cafe window, people rush by, checking their phones, glancing at their watches, moving from one place to another as if happiness is waiting just around the corner. He knows that feeling all too well. The constant chase, the belief that the next thing, the next achievement, will finally bring him peace. Mr. Ellis watches him for a moment before speaking. Orion, when you were younger, what did you think happiness would look like? The question lingers in the air, forcing Orion to search for an answer. Success, he finally says. A life where I didn't have to worry about money, a place of my own, recognition. I thought that if I had those things, I'd be happy. No stress, no doubts, just peace. He pauses, shaking his head. But now that I have them, I still feel like something's missing. The waitress sets a fresh cup of coffee on the table next to them. At the counter, a young man in a suit fumbles with his phone, barely acknowledging the barista handing him his drink. His eyes are glued to the screen, scrolling through emails, lost in another world. Orion recognizes that look. It's the look of someone who's always thinking about the next thing, never fully present. Mr. Ellis follows Orion's gaze and smirks. That was you, wasn't it? Orion lets out a breath, rubbing his temple. Yeah. Always planning, always waiting for the next milestone, believing that happiness was just one step away. He looks down at his cup, but it never is. Mr. Ellis nods knowingly. That's one of the biggest illusions we create for ourselves, the belief that happiness is something we'll eventually reach. We tell ourselves, I'll be happy when I get the promotion. I'll be happy when I buy the house. I'll be happy when I finally have enough saved to retire. And yet, every time we reach a goal, the feeling fades, and we move the target again. Orion exhales, leaning back against his chair. It's exhausting. No matter how much I achieve, it's never enough. That's because it never was about the goal, Mr. Ellis says. It was about the chase. People believe that happiness is a finish line, that once they cross it, they'll finally be at peace. But happiness doesn't work like that. Orion frowns, tapping his fingers against the table. So, what does that mean? We just stop setting goals? No, Mr. Ellis says. It means we stop believing that happiness is waiting for us at the end of the road. The cafe door swings open, and an older man walks in, dressed simply, carrying nothing but a small bag. He greets the barista warmly, then takes a seat by the window, sipping his coffee slowly, watching the world pass by. There's something about him, something unshaken, at ease. Orion watches him for a moment, then turns back to Mr. Ellis. That man doesn't look rich. He doesn't look like someone who has everything, but he seems content. Mr. Ellis smiles, because he's not chasing something. He's here, fully present. Orion grips his cup a little tighter. He has spent years running after things, money, titles, approval. But now, sitting here, watching a man with seemingly so little feel so at peace, he starts to wonder if he has been looking for happiness in the wrong places all along. Mr. Ellis studies him for a moment before speaking again. Orion, tell me, what's the difference between pleasure and happiness? Orion hesitates. Aren't they the same? Mr. Ellis shakes his head. Not even close. Pleasure is external. It's the rush of buying something new, the thrill of a promotion, the satisfaction of being admired. But happiness is deeper. It's internal. It doesn't depend on what's happening around you. It's something you cultivate. Orion sits with that thought. He's been living off pleasure, success, validation, material comfort, but not happiness. And the worst part? Pleasure always fades. The joy of a new achievement lasts a few days. Then it becomes normal, and he starts searching for the next thing to chase. Mr. Ellis leans in slightly. Tell me, when was the last time you felt truly happy? Orion blinks. His mind races. It wasn't when he landed his biggest deal. It wasn't when he bought his dream house. Instead, the memories that surface are simple. Laughing uncontrollably with an old friend. Walking in the rain, not caring if he got wet. Sitting on the beach, watching the waves, feeling completely at peace. Moments. Not achievements. Mr. Ellis watches as realization washes over Orion's face. You see, he says, happiness isn't something you find at the end of the road. It's in how you walk it. Orion exhales sharply, rubbing his temples. So I've been chasing the wrong thing. Not wrong, Mr. Ellis corrects, just incomplete. He takes a slow sip of coffee before continuing. Modern society has conditioned us to believe that happiness is tied to status, wealth, or admiration. But let me ask you this. If happiness depended on those things, then why are so many successful people miserable? Orion doesn't answer. He doesn't have to. He knows it's true. He's seen it. So what's the solution? He finally asks. Mr. Ellis sets his cup down. You redefine success. You stop measuring your happiness by what you accomplish and start measuring it by how you live. The door opens again, and two young women step in, laughing with each other. They order their drinks, sit down, and continue talking, fully engaged, not checking their phones, not rushing. Just being. Orion watches them for a moment, realizing something profound. They're not waiting to be happy, he murmurs. No, Mr. Ellis agrees. They just are. Orion lets out a slow breath. He spent his whole life chasing happiness like a prize, believing that if he worked hard enough, he would finally win it. But maybe, all this time, happiness was never something to earn. Maybe it was something to recognize. So what now? He asks. Mr. Ellis smiles. Now you learn how to stop running. And that's exactly what they were going to do next. 3. Burden of the past. Orion sat across from Mr. Ellis, the coffee in his cup now cold. Their conversation had peeled away layers of illusions about success, about happiness, about the endless chase that never truly ends. But something still weighed on him. Even if he understood that happiness wasn't in achievements, he still felt stuck, like something was holding him back. Mr. Ellis seemed to read his mind. He reached down and placed a backpack on the table, its worn fabric stretched from the weight inside. Put this on, he said. Orion frowned but obeyed, sliding the straps over his shoulders. The weight was immediate. What's in here? He asked, adjusting his posture. Mr. Ellis leaned back, a knowing smile on his lips. Your past. Orion scoffed, shifting the backpack slightly to relieve the strain. That's ridiculous. Is it? Mr. Ellis asked, sipping his coffee. Then walk with it for a bit. Orion hesitated, then stood up, feeling the full weight pressing down on him. It wasn't unbearable, but it was uncomfortable, constantly pulling him down, forcing him to compensate with every step. They stepped outside, the cool air hitting Orion's face as he walked beside his old teacher. So what is this supposed to prove? He asked, adjusting the straps again. Mr. Ellis gestured to the passing crowd. Look around you. How many of these people do you think are walking around with their own invisible backpacks? Orion followed his gaze. People hurrying to work, couples walking in silence, a man sitting alone on a park bench, staring at nothing in particular. Mr. Ellis continued. Most people don't realize how much they're carrying. Regrets, failures, missed opportunities, things they wish they could change but can't. And yet they drag it all with them every single day. Orion felt his chest tighten. He knew exactly what that felt like. His past haunted him more than he cared to admit. The relationships he ruined because he was too focused on work. The friendships that faded because he was always too busy. The moments he missed with his family, thinking there would always be more time. He took a deep breath, but it didn't make the weight any lighter. So what? He muttered. We all have things we regret. What are we supposed to do? Just forget them? Mr. Ellis shook his head. Not forget, except there's a difference. They reached a quiet part of the park, where an old wooden bench faced a small lake. Mr. Ellis gestured for Orion to sit. Take off the backpack, he instructed. Orion didn't hesitate. He slid it off and let it drop to the ground. His shoulders immediately felt lighter. Mr. Ellis smiled. Feel that? Orion rolled his shoulders. Yeah, it's a relief. That's what letting go feels like, Mr. Ellis said. But most people don't allow themselves to do it. They think if they stop feeling guilty, they're betraying their past. They hold on to pain as if it somehow serves them. Orion looked down at the backpack. But isn't the past part of who we are? Of course, Mr. Ellis nodded. But carrying it with you every day doesn't change it. The Stoics believed that we should accept what has happened, learn from it, and then move forward. Regret is only useful if it teaches you something. Otherwise, it's just unnecessary weight. Orion ran a hand through his hair. Easier said than done. No one said it was easy, Mr. Ellis admitted. But what's harder, letting go or carrying it for the rest of your life? Orion thought about that, about how exhausted he was, how no matter what he achieved, it never made up for the things he lost along the way. He stared at the backpack on the ground. It was just an object, just fabric and weight. But it was a symbol of something much heavier. He looked at Mr. Ellis. And what if I don't know how to let go? You start by realizing that you're the one holding on, Mr. Ellis said. Nothing from your past is physically weighing you down. You are the one choosing to carry it. Orion swallowed hard. That truth hit deeper than he expected. Mr. Ellis stood up, stretching slightly. Come on, let's keep walking. Orion hesitated before grabbing the backpack. But instead of slinging it over his shoulders, he held it in one hand, letting it hang loosely at his side. They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the city distant, the rustling trees above them filling the space. After a few minutes, Orion exhaled and set the backpack down on a nearby bench. He didn't need to carry it anymore. He turned to Mr. Ellis. So what now? Mr. Ellis smiled. Now, we talk about what's ahead. Orion nodded, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Maybe it wasn't relief. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the first taste of freedom. 4. Accepting what cannot be changed. Orion and Mr. Ellis continued their walk through the park, the weight on Orion's shoulders now significantly lighter. But despite dropping the metaphorical backpack of his past, something still lingered. A dull, nagging feeling that no matter what he did, some things would always be out of his control. The thought frustrated him. He had spent his entire life working to shape his future, to control outcomes, to avoid failure. But even with all his efforts, there were still things he couldn't change. Mr. Ellis must have sensed his unease because, after a few moments of silence, he stopped near a small cafe on the edge of the park. The two men took a seat outside, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Mr. Ellis gestured toward Orion's cup. Imagine you're drinking this coffee, he said. It's hot, fresh, just the way you like it. But if you leave it sitting there long enough, what happens? Orion frowned. It gets cold. Exactly, Mr. Ellis said. And can you stop it from getting cold? Orion considered the question. I mean, I could reheat it. But can you prevent it from cooling down in the first place? Orion sighed. No. Mr. Ellis nodded. That's life. Everything changes whether we want it to or not, and the more we resist it, the more we suffer. Orion stared down at his coffee, watching the steam slowly fade. It was such a simple truth, but one that felt heavier than he expected. I get it, Orion admitted. Change is inevitable, but that doesn't mean it's easy to accept. No, it doesn't, Mr. Ellis agreed. But fighting against what you can't control doesn't make it easier. It only makes you more frustrated. Orion thought back to all the times he had resisted change, when a business deal collapsed and he obsessed over what he could have done differently, when a relationship ended and he spent months replaying conversations in his mind, trying to figure out where it went wrong, when he saw time slipping away and he wished he could slow it down. Each time, the more he fought reality, the more miserable he became. Mr. Ellis took a sip of his coffee before speaking again. The Stoics believed in something called amor fati, the love of fate, not just accepting what happens, but embracing it as part of your journey. Because whether you like it or not, life will continue to unfold, with or without your approval. Orion let out a slow breath. So what do you do when something happens that you don't want? You ask yourself a simple question, Mr. Ellis said. Can I change this? He set his cup down. If the answer is yes, then you take action. But if the answer is no, then you adapt. You shift your focus to what you can control, your response, your mindset, your next step. Anything else is wasted energy. Orion leaned back in his chair, absorbing the words. He had spent years pouring energy into things he couldn't change, worrying about the economy, stressing over what people thought of him, regretting things that were long over. How much time had he wasted trying to control the uncontrollable? Nearby, a group of children played near a fountain. One little girl chased after a balloon that had slipped from her grasp. She reached for it, but the wind carried it higher and higher until it was completely out of reach. For a second, she looked like she was about to cry. Then, as if making a decision, she turned back toward her friends and joined their game, laughing as if nothing had happened. Orion watched the scene unfold. "She let it go," he murmured. Mr. Ellis smiled. Exactly. That was the difference. The child understood something that most adults never learned. She didn't waste time crying over what she couldn't change. She moved forward, embracing what was still in front of her. Orion shook his head. "It sounds so simple when you say it like that." "It is simple," Mr. Ellis said, "but simple doesn't mean easy." Orion picked up his coffee, taking a thoughtful sip. "So what happens when life throws something at you that you weren't prepared for? Something painful, something you didn't ask for?" Mr. Ellis met his gaze. "You grieve. You feel it, you acknowledge it, but then you let it be what it is, a part of your story, not the whole story." The words settled over Orion like a gentle weight. He thought of the things in his life he had resisted, the regrets, the disappointments, the things he wished had turned out differently. And he realized something. Holding on to them didn't change the past. It only kept him from living fully in the present. A breeze passed through the cafe patio, rustling the napkins on their table. Orion glanced at the trees, their leaves shifting effortlessly with the wind. They didn't fight it, they moved with it. He turned back to Mr. Ellis. "All right," he said, setting his cup down. "So if I want to be happy, I need to stop fighting reality and start working with it." Mr. Ellis nodded. "Exactly. Accept what you can't change. Focus on what you can. That's where your power is." Orion exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure if he was ready to embrace amor fati just yet, but for the first time, he understood why it mattered. As they got up to leave, Orion felt lighter, not because his circumstances had changed, but because his perspective had. And maybe, just maybe, that was the change he needed all along. 5. The Art of Gratitude. Orion and Mr. Ellis walked down a quiet street, the late afternoon sun casting golden hues over the city. The conversation about control and acceptance still lingered in Orion's mind, but another thought had begun to surface, something he had rarely considered but had always been missing. As they strolled past a small bakery, the scent of fresh bread filled the air. An elderly man sat on a nearby bench, slowly unwrapping a simple sandwich. His clothes were plain, his shoes well worn, yet he ate with a kind of quiet satisfaction, as if this moment, this meal, was enough. Orion couldn't help but watch. Mr. Ellis noticed his gaze. "What are you thinking?" Orion hesitated. "That man, he doesn't look like he has much, but he seems content." Mr. Ellis nodded. "Because he is," Orion frowned. "How? How can someone with so little seem happier than people who have everything?" Mr. Ellis smiled. "Because he's not focused on what's missing. He's focused on what's here." Orion let the words sink in as they continued walking. They reached a quieter neighborhood where children played outside, their laughter echoing through the streets. A mother stood at her door, watching them with a tired but genuine smile. Nearby, an older couple sat on their porch, sipping tea, speaking in soft tones. None of them had the wealth Orion had accumulated, yet they looked happier than he had felt in years. Finally, Mr. Ellis stopped in front of a modest home. The wooden fence was slightly worn, and the garden was small but well kept. A man, probably in his late 40s, stepped out, wiping his hands on his jeans. He looked up and smiled. "Ellis, it's been a while." The two men shook hands before Mr. Ellis turned to Orion. "This is James, an old friend." James led them inside, where the scent of home-cooked food filled the air. The space was simple. No extravagant decorations, no luxury furniture, just warmth. His wife greeted them, offering tea, while two children peeked from the hallway before running off, their giggles trailing behind them. Orion took it all in. There was nothing particularly special about the house. But there was a feeling here, something he couldn't quite define. James sat down across from Orion, leaning back in his chair. Ellis tells me you've been thinking a lot about happiness. Orion chuckled. That's an understatement. James smiled. I used to think like you, always wanting more, believing that once I had it, I'd finally be happy. But the more I chased, the more I felt like I was running on a treadmill. No matter how much I achieved, it was never enough. Orion's eyes narrowed. So, what changed? James gestured around him. I stopped measuring happiness by what I didn't have. I started appreciating what I did. Orion considered that. You're saying gratitude makes you happy? James nodded. Exactly. Most people wake up thinking about what's missing, what they don't have yet, what they still need to accomplish. But happiness isn't found in what's missing. It's found in what's already here. Orion let the words settle. James continued. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat down and truly appreciated the simplest things in your life? Your health, your mind, the ability to walk, to breathe, to see? Orion opened his mouth to answer but stopped. He couldn't remember. His life had been a series of checkboxes. Achieve this, acquire that. But had he ever paused to appreciate any of it? James smiled. You see, gratitude is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. But if you don't practice, you'll always feel like something is missing, no matter how much you have. Orion exhaled, running a hand through his hair. So how do you start? James leaned forward. Every morning, before I do anything else, I list 3 things I'm grateful for. They don't have to be big, just real. My family, the sunlight coming through the window, a good cup of coffee. It resets my mind. It reminds me that I already have more than enough. Mr. Ellis chimed in. The Stoics believed in practicing gratitude daily, not as a luxury, but as a discipline. They knew that the key to happiness wasn't getting more. It was recognizing that you already have enough. Orion thought about that. For so long, he had believed that happiness was something to be earned, something that came later. But maybe he had been looking at it the wrong way. Maybe happiness wasn't waiting for him at the end of his ambitions. Maybe it was here, in the simple moments he had overlooked. He looked around the room again. The warmth, the laughter in the background, the quiet contentment. It wasn't success in the way he had always defined it, but it was real, and maybe that was the point. As they got up to leave, James clapped a hand on Orion's shoulder. Try it, he said. Tomorrow morning, before you get lost in the day, just take a moment and be grateful for what you already have. Orion nodded, feeling something shift inside him. As he stepped outside, the evening air felt fresher, lighter. He wasn't sure if gratitude alone could change everything, but for the first time, he was willing to try. And maybe that was enough. 6. The joy of giving. Orion walked alongside Mr. Ellis, the quiet streets now illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. The conversation about gratitude still lingered in his mind. It made sense, focusing on what you already have instead of what's missing. But deep inside, he still felt like something was incomplete. He could appreciate the present, but there was still a question gnawing at him. How do you sustain happiness? Orion finally asked, breaking the silence. Gratitude helps, sure, but it feels passive, like I'm just training myself to be okay with what I have. Mr. Ellis chuckled, shaking his head. Happiness isn't just about appreciation, Orion. It's also about contribution. Orion frowned. Contribution? They turned a corner and stepped onto a quieter street. At the end of the block stood a small community kitchen, its windows glowing warmly. Outside, a group of volunteers handed out food to people waiting in line. Some homeless, others just struggling to get by. There was no fanfare, no cameras, no social media posts, just quiet acts of kindness. Come, Mr. Ellis said, leading Orion toward the entrance. Inside, the space was filled with movement. Volunteers filled plates, handed out warm meals, and greeted each person with a smile. There was a kind of energy in the room that Orion hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, not adrenaline, something else. Peace. One of the volunteers, a man in his 60s, approached them. His apron was stained from hours of cooking, but his face carried an undeniable sense of contentment. Ellis, good to see you, he said, wiping his hands on a towel before shaking Mr. Ellis's hand. You too, Daniel, Mr. Ellis replied. This is Orion. Thought he could use a different perspective on happiness. Daniel chuckled. Ah, one of those, huh? He turned to Orion with an amused look. Let me guess. Spent your whole life chasing something, only to realize it never really filled you up. Orion smirked. Something like that. Daniel nodded knowingly. Yeah, I was the same. Worked in finance for 30 years. Made more money than I ever needed, but I was miserable. Then, one day, I volunteered here. Just once. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that actually mattered. Orion glanced around the room again. The volunteers weren't being paid. They weren't getting recognition. Yet, they looked happy. Genuinely happy. Daniel continued, most people think happiness comes from what they get, but real happiness, it comes from what you give. Orion stayed silent, watching as a volunteer handed a plate to an elderly woman. She took it with both hands, her eyes shining with gratitude. The volunteer didn't expect anything in return. No reward, no validation, just the quiet joy of knowing they had helped. So what happened? Orion asked. Daniel smiled. I never stopped volunteering. Eventually, I quit my job and started working here full-time. Best decision I ever made. Orion raised an eyebrow. So you gave up everything you worked for? Daniel shook his head. I didn't give up anything. I gained something more valuable. Orion let that sit for a moment. He had spent his entire life thinking happiness was about acquiring more money, more success, more achievements. But standing here, surrounded by people who had nothing to prove, he realized he had been looking at it all wrong. Mr. Ellis leaned against the counter. The Stoics believe that a meaningful life isn't about personal gain. It's about being of service to others. The more you focus on yourself, the more empty you feel. But when you give, truly give, without expecting anything in return, you create a sense of fulfillment that nothing else can match. Orion sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I get that, but let's be honest, people work hard for what they have. It's not always easy to just give. Daniel shrugged. Giving doesn't always mean money, kid. It can be time, attention, effort. Sometimes just listening to someone who's struggling is enough. The point isn't how much you give, it's that you give. Orion nodded slowly, still processing. So you're saying that the more I focus on others, the happier I'll be? Mr. Ellis smiled. Not just happier, freer. Orion exhaled, looking around the room one more time. The laughter, the conversations, the warmth, there was something undeniably real about it. These people weren't chasing happiness. They were creating it for themselves and for others. As they stepped outside, Orion felt different, lighter, the same way he felt when he had taken off that metaphorical backpack of his past. But this time, it wasn't just about letting go. It was about stepping forward. He looked at Mr. Ellis. So where do I start? Mr. Ellis grinned. Find a way to help. It doesn't have to be big. Just do something that isn't about you. Orion thought about that. Maybe happiness wasn't just about what he could have. Maybe it was also about what he could give. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to try. 7. Living in the present. Orion sat on a park bench, watching the late afternoon sun dip toward the horizon. The air was crisp, the golden light filtering through the trees, casting long shadows on the pavement. He had spent the past few days unraveling everything he thought he knew about happiness. But now, something still felt unresolved. It wasn't about the past anymore. He had learned to let go. It wasn't about the future either. He was beginning to accept that some things were beyond his control. But there was one thing he still struggled with. How do you actually live in the present? He asked, turning to Mr. Ellis, who sat beside him. Mr. Ellis smiled, as if he had been waiting for that question. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a smooth, round stone, placing it in Orion's hand. Hold this, he said. Orion turned the stone over between his fingers, feeling its cool, solid surface. Okay, he said, unsure of the point. Now, Mr. Ellis continued, while holding it, I want you to think about every mistake you've ever made, every opportunity you missed, every regret. Orion sighed, but he did as he was told. His mind immediately filled with memories, failures, wrong choices, things he wished he'd done differently. A familiar weight pressed down on him. Mr. Ellis watched him carefully. Now, I want you to shift your focus. Instead of the past, think about the future. Everything you're worried about, everything you need to do, everything that could go wrong. Orion clenched his jaw. Deadlines, responsibilities, uncertainties, they all crowded his thoughts, filling his chest with tension. Now, Mr. Ellis said, his voice calm but firm, Tell me what the stone feels like." Orion blinked. "What?" "The stone," Mr. Ellis repeated. "Describe how it feels in your hand." Orion frowned, looking down at the small object in his palm. He had been so caught up in his thoughts that he had barely registered its weight, its texture, the way it rested against his skin. I wasn't paying attention to it," he admitted. Mr. Ellis leaned back, folding his arms. "That's what happens when you live in the past or the future. You stop noticing what's right in front of you." Orion let the realization sink in. He had spent so much of his life lost in memories or worrying about what was next that he had never fully experienced the now. His mind was always somewhere else, replaying old conversations, planning his next move, anticipating problems before they happened. But what about this moment? The air on his skin, the sounds of birds in the trees, the warmth of the sun on his face. He had missed so much simply because he had never truly been present. The Stoics believed that the only time that truly exists is now, Mr. Ellis continued. The past is done. The future isn't real yet. But this? He gestured around them. This moment is real, and most people let it slip through their fingers without even realizing it. Orion looked around, really looked this time. The people walking past, the leaves rustling gently in the breeze, the distant sound of laughter. He had walked through this park countless times before, but had he ever actually seen it? He exhaled slowly, turning the stone over in his hand again. This time he felt it. The way it pressed against his palm, the cool smoothness against his skin, the tiny imperfections on its surface. It was such a small thing, but for the first time in a long time, he was completely present. Mr. Ellis smiled. That's mindfulness, Orion. That's what it means to live in the moment. Orion nodded, still absorbing it all. But how do you stay here, in the present? You practice, Mr. Ellis said simply. Every time your mind pulls you into the past or drags you into the future, bring it back. Focus on what you're doing right now, your breath, your surroundings, the way your body feels. Engage with the world instead of getting lost in your head. Orion thought about that. It sounded simple, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. He had spent years letting his mind wander, letting it pull him away from the present. Breaking that habit would take time. But what if things aren't okay in the present? He asked after a moment. What if right now isn't good? Mr. Ellis studied him before replying. Then be present with that too. Feel it. Don't run from it. Because even pain, when fully experienced, passes quicker than suffering that's resisted. Orion swallowed hard. He had spent so much of his life avoiding discomfort, distracting himself, planning ahead, numbing emotions before they could take hold. But maybe, just maybe, the answer wasn't in running. Maybe it was in staying. He took a deep breath, letting the air fill his lungs, then slowly released it. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't rushing to the next thought. He wasn't clinging to the last one either. He was just here, in this moment. And that, in itself, felt like a small kind of freedom. He looked at Mr. Ellis. So, if happiness isn't in the past or the future, and it's only found in the present, then I guess the real question is, how do I make sure I don't miss it? Mr. Ellis grinned. You pay attention, every single day. Orion turned the stone in his hand once more before slipping it into his pocket. A reminder, a symbol of presence. As they stood to leave, the world around him felt clearer, sharper. Nothing had changed, but somehow everything felt different. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. 8. Happiness is a choice. Orion walked through the quiet streets, his mind still turning over everything he had learned. He had spent so much of his life believing that happiness was something to be found, hidden in success, buried in achievements, waiting at the end of some distant finish line. But now he saw it differently. Happiness wasn't something outside of him. It wasn't something he had to chase. It was something he had to choose. Mr. Ellis strolled beside him, hands in his pockets, watching as Orion absorbed this realization. You look like a man who's just discovered something important, he remarked with a smirk. Orion chuckled. I think I have. He exhaled slowly, glancing up at the stars beginning to appear overhead. Happiness isn't a destination, is it? Mr. Ellis shook his head. No, it never was. Orion nodded. It's a choice. Mr. Ellis stopped walking, turning to face him. Exactly. Happiness is a decision you make every single day. It's not about waiting for the perfect circumstances or for life to hand you exactly what you want. It's about deciding to find joy in the life you have right now. Orion looked around. The world hadn't changed. The city was the same. The streets, the buildings, the people, nothing was different. And yet, everything felt different. How do you keep choosing it? He asked after a moment. Some days, it's easy to feel happy, but other days, he trailed off, thinking about the times when life felt overwhelming, when stress, disappointment, or loss made happiness seem impossible. Mr. Ellis nodded in understanding. That's the real challenge, isn't it? But that's where the Stoics had it right. They knew that happiness isn't about what happens to you, it's about how you respond. Orion thought about that. He had always believed happiness was dictated by circumstances, that it depended on success, wealth, relationships, or even luck. But if that were true, why were so many successful people miserable? Why were people with seemingly perfect lives still searching for something more? Happiness isn't passive, Mr. Ellis continued. It's something you create, and that starts with your mindset. Orion sighed, rubbing his temples. So how do you actually practice that? How do you make happiness a habit instead of just something that comes and goes? Mr. Ellis smiled. You train yourself to focus on what you can control. You practice gratitude. You live in the present. You help others. And most importantly, you stop expecting happiness to be perfect. Some days will be harder than others. Some moments will test you. But that's when you remind yourself, it's still a choice. Orion thought about the people he had met over the past few days. The elderly man eating his simple sandwich in peace. The volunteers at the community kitchen, giving their time with no expectation of anything in return. James, who had learned to measure success not by what he gained, but by what he appreciated. None of them had perfect lives, but they had all made a choice. Orion inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of years of misconceptions lift slightly from his shoulders. Maybe happiness wasn't about having the perfect life. Maybe it was about learning to live fully, despite imperfections. They reached a quiet park, where the glow of streetlights reflected off a still pond. Orion picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water, watching the ripples spread outward. You know, he said, I used to think happiness was a reward, something I'd earn if I worked hard enough, if I accomplished enough. And now? Mr. Ellis asked. Orion watched as the ripples disappeared, leaving the water calm once again. Now I think it's more like this pond. You don't find happiness by waiting for everything to be perfect. You create it by choosing how to see the world. Mr. Ellis smiled. Then I'd say you've learned the most important lesson. Orion turned to him. And what's that? That happiness has been in your hands all along. The words settled over Orion like a quiet truth he had always known, but never fully understood. He had spent years looking for something that had never been missing. He had just been looking in the wrong place. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. He took a deep breath, letting the night air fill his lungs. So what now? Mr. Ellis chuckled. Now? Now you go live. Orion smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. And as he walked away, he realized he wasn't searching anymore. He was simply here in this moment, choosing happiness, and maybe that was enough. Orion stood at the edge of the park, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The night air was crisp, carrying the hum of life. Conversations, distant laughter, the quiet rustle of leaves. It was a city he had walked through 1,000 times before. Yet somehow, everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. For years, he had chased happiness like a prize at the end of a long race. He had believed it was something to be earned, something waiting for him in a better job, a bigger house, or the approval of others. But now, he understood the truth. Happiness was never a finish line. It was never something he had to wait for. It was always here, hidden in the moments he had been too distracted to see. In the warmth of a cup of coffee, in the laughter of a stranger, in the quiet stillness of a morning. He smiled, slipping his hands into his pockets. The search was over. Not because he had found happiness, but because he had finally stopped looking for it in the wrong places. And maybe that's the real question we should all ask ourselves. Are we ready to stop searching and start living? Because happiness isn't something waiting for us in the future. It's here, right now, if we choose to see it.